Her name was in his pocket through every battle and on his lips when he came home. If this story touched your heart, there's so much more waiting for you. Subscribe and join the journey. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning in October 1941, delivered by Mrs. Patterson from the post office, who rode her bicycle through the neighborhoods of Cedar Falls, Iowa, her basket filled with correspondence that would change lives forever. Margaret Maggie Sinclair was hanging laundry on the line behind her family's two-story Victorian home when she heard the familiar squeak of bicycle brakes on the gravel driveway. "Letter for you, dear," Mrs. Patterson called out, her weathered face creased with the kind of smile reserved for young love. "Looks official." Maggie's heart quickened as she recognized the angular handwriting on the cream-colored envelope. Thomas Edmund Harper, Tommy to everyone who knew him, had been gone for 3 weeks now, training somewhere in Georgia with the Army Air Forces. The distance between them felt infinite, measured not just in miles, but in the uncertainty of a world sliding inexorably toward war. She wiped her damp hands on her blue cotton dress, the one Tommy had said brought out her eyes, and carefully opened the envelope. His words spilled across the page in that familiar scrawl, each sentence carrying the weight of longing and the peculiar formality of a young man trying to express feelings too large for ordinary language. "My dearest Maggie, the days here stretch longer than Iowa summers, and every sunrise reminds me how far I am from home. From you. They have us up before dawn, running drills until our legs shake and our lungs burn, but it's in the quiet moments, when we're cleaning our rifles or standing in formation, that I feel the distance most acutely. I carry your photograph in my breast pocket, right over my heart. The other fellows tease me about it, but I don't mind. Sergeant Morrison says a soldier needs something worth fighting for, something that makes him remember what he's protecting. For me, that something is the way you laugh when you're embarrassed, and the way you bite your lower lip when you're concentrating on your nursing studies. I want to tell you something, Maggie. Something I should have said before I left. I love you. Not the way schoolboys think they love, but the way a man loves a woman he wants to spend his life with. I know we're young, and I know the world is changing in ways we can't predict, but I need you to know that whatever happens, wherever this war takes me, you are the constant in my heart. Write to me, please. Tell me about your classes, about your mother's garden, about the way the maple tree in your front yard is turning colors. Tell me about ordinary things so I can remember what we're all fighting to preserve. All my love." Tommy Maggie pressed the letter to her chest and closed her eyes, feeling the October wind stir the auburn curls that had escaped from her carefully pinned hair. Around her, the world continued its steady progression toward winter, leaves surrendering their green to gold and crimson, geese calling overhead in their southern migration, the scent of burning leaves drifting from neighboring yards. But for Maggie, time seemed suspended in the space between heartbeats, in the gulf between her quiet life in Cedar Falls and Tommy's world of military preparation. She had known Thomas Harper since they were children. He lived 4 houses down on Maple Street, and their mothers had been friends since before either of them was born. Tommy was the boy who had defended her against the neighborhood bullies, who had taught her to skip stones on the Cedar River, who had asked her to the spring dance with such endearing nervousness that she had said yes before he finished stumbling through his invitation. But the young man who had left for training was different from the boy she had grown up with. The threat of war had changed him, had given weight to his words and purpose to his movements. When he kissed her goodbye at the train station, she had tasted something new on his lips. Not just love, but the metallic tang of destiny. Now, holding his letter, Maggie understood that their love story would be written against the backdrop of history, shaped by forces beyond their control. She folded the letter carefully and slipped it into her dress pocket, then gathered the laundry and walked into the house to write her reply. "My darling Tommy, your letter arrived this morning like sunshine breaking through storm clouds. I have read it so many times that I could recite it from memory, and each reading reveals new depths in your words. You ask me to tell you about ordinary things, but nothing feels ordinary anymore. The world has taken on a different texture since you left, as if I'm seeing everything through glass. Mother's dahlia garden is still beautiful, but the colors seem muted. The maple tree you mentioned has turned the most glorious shade of orange, but even its beauty feels fragile, temporary. I'm doing well in my nursing classes. We practice bandaging techniques and learn about infection prevention, and I find myself thinking about how these skills might serve you and others like you. Perhaps that's presumptuous, but I want to be useful in whatever way I can. You write about loving me, and I must tell you that your words have settled into my heart like seeds in fertile soil. I have loved you for so long that I can hardly remember a time when that love wasn't part of me, as natural as breathing. But your letter has given that love new meaning, new urgency. I love you not just as the boy who held my hand during thunderstorms, but as the man who is willing to face whatever comes to protect the things we hold dear. I am enclosing a pressed flower from Mother's garden, a purple aster that bloomed late this season. Keep it with my photograph, and when you look at it, remember that love, like this flower, can bloom even in the harsh light of autumn. Come back to me, Thomas Harper. Come back whole and safe, because I intend to spend my life loving you. Forever yours, Maggie. The months that followed brought a rhythm of letters, each one a lifeline stretched across the growing chasm of distance and time. Tommy's training intensified, and his letters began to carry new vocabulary. Terms like air gunnery and formation flying, and deployment preparation. Maggie's replies were filled with the details of her nursing program and the subtle changes in their hometown as young men disappeared and women took their places in factories and offices. By spring of 1942, Tommy had earned his wings and been assigned to the 351st Bombardment Group. His letters now bore postmarks from England, and the content had shifted from romantic yearning to careful descriptions of the English countryside, the peculiarities of British weather, and the camaraderie he had found among his fellow airmen. He wrote less about fear and more about duty, less about the uncertainty of war, and more about the importance of the mission. Maggie, meanwhile, had graduated from her nursing program and taken a position at Cedar Falls General Hospital. The war had created a shortage of medical personnel, and she found herself working longer hours, caring for an increasing number of patients whose ailments were connected, directly or indirectly, to the conflict overseas. She treated workers injured in the newfound urgency of factory production, wives collapsing from the strain of managing households alone, and elderly parents whose health had declined with worry for their sons. My dearest Maggie, I'm writing this from our base in England, where the spring rain falls with such persistence that I have begun to understand why the English speak of weather with such resignation. Everything here is green, in a way that makes Iowa seem almost austere by comparison. Rolling hills covered in grass so vibrant it hardly seems real. Hedgerows thick with flowering hawthorn. Gardens where roses climb stone walls with wild abandon. We have been flying missions over occupied Europe, and while I cannot tell you specifics, I can say that each sortie reinforces my understanding of why we are here. From 20,000 feet, the continent spreads below us like a map, but it is a map scarred by the machinery of war. We see the shadows of conflict even from that height. Cities darkened, roads clogged with refugees, the geometric patterns of military installations. But I want to tell you about something else, something that happened yesterday that made me think of you with particular intensity. Our squadron was returning from a mission when we encountered a formation of German fighters. The engagement lasted perhaps 10 minutes, though it felt like hours, and when it was over our aircraft had taken several hits. Nothing critical, but enough to remind us all of our mortality. As we limped back toward England, I reached into my breast pocket and felt your photograph there, along with that pressed aster you sent me. The flower has become brittle with time, but I handle it carefully, and it still carries a faint scent that reminds me of autumn afternoons in your mother's garden. In that moment, with the English Channel below us and the sound of our damaged engines in my ears, I understood something fundamental about love and war. Love does not make war bearable. Nothing could do that. But love gives war meaning. It transforms abstract concepts like freedom and democracy into something personal and immediate. When I think about the cities we bomb and the risks we take, I am not fighting for political ideologies. I am fighting for the right to come home to you, to marry you in the church where we both were baptized, to raise children who will never know the fear that shadows our generation. I am fighting for Tuesday morning letters and pressed flowers, and the way you bite your lower lip when you concentrate. The chaplain held services yesterday evening, and I found myself praying not for victory or even for survival, but for the strength to be worthy of your love, and for the wisdom to carry that love intact through whatever lies ahead. All my devotion, Tommy Maggie read this letter in the break room of the hospital during her lunch hour, and when she finished, she had to sit quietly for several minutes before she could trust herself to return to work. The weight of his words, the gravity of his situation seemed almost too much to bear. She understood now that their love story was not a private thing, but part of something larger and more terrible than she had imagined. That evening, she sat at her bedroom desk and composed her longest letter yet. My beloved Tommy, your letter arrived today, and I have spent the afternoon thinking about your words, about love and war, and the impossible distance that separates us. You write about fighting for the right to come home, and I want you to know that I am fighting too, though my battlefield looks very different from yours. I am fighting against the despair that creeps in during the long hours of my shifts, when I tend to patients whose sons are missing in action or whose husbands have been wounded in places I can barely pronounce. I am fighting against the fear that wakes me in the early morning hours, when the house is quiet and my imagination fills with terrible possibilities. But mostly, I am fighting to keep alive the vision of our future that sustains us both. I picture the wedding we will have when you come home, not grand or elaborate, but surrounded by people who love us, in the church where we both sang in the children's choir. I picture the house we will share, with a garden where I will grow asters and dahlias and all the flowers that remind me of hope. I picture growing old with you, Tommy, and that picture is so vivid, so essential to who I am becoming, that I refuse to consider any alternative. You ask about ordinary things, so let me tell you about Mrs. Kowalski, who comes to the hospital every Tuesday to visit her husband. He was injured in the steel plant, and his recovery has been slow, but she sits beside his bed and reads him letters from their son, who is serving in the Pacific. She reads with such tenderness, such absolute faith, that her husband will recover and her son will return, that I find myself believing in miracles. Let me tell you about the Victory Garden that has replaced the ornamental flower bed in front of the hospital. We grow tomatoes and beans and lettuce, and the patients who are able help with the weeding and watering. There is something profound about watching things grow in the midst of so much uncertainty, something that speaks to the persistence of hope, even in the darkest times. And let me tell you about the new nurse, Patricia, who joined our staff last month. Her husband was killed at Pearl Harbor, and she channels her grief into the most gentle, competent care I have ever witnessed. She reminds me that sorrow and love are not opposites, but companions, and that the depth of our loss measures the depth of our connection to what we have lost. I am learning, Tommy, that love in wartime is not just about waiting and hoping. It is about finding ways to serve, to contribute, to honor the sacrifice that others are making. I cannot fly missions over Europe, but I can heal what can be healed and comfort what cannot be healed. And in doing so, I feel closer to you and to the cause we both serve. Come home to me, my darling. Come home so we can discover together what kind of people this war has made us. With all my love, Maggie. Summer brought a different kind of anxiety. Tommy's letters, which had arrived with clockwork regularity through the spring, began to come less frequently. When they did arrive, they were shorter, more cautious, filled with careful descriptions of English weather and rural scenery, but lacking the intimate details that had sustained Maggie through the long months of separation. She understood, intellectually, that the increasing intensity of the air war meant tighter censorship, more dangerous missions, less time for correspondence. But emotionally, the silence felt like abandonment, like watching a door slowly close between them. In July, nearly 3 weeks passed without a letter. Maggie found herself checking the mailbox multiple times each day, her heart racing at the sound of Mrs. Patterson's bicycle bell, then sinking when the mail contained only bills and advertisements. She began to have trouble sleeping, lying awake imagining scenarios too terrible to voice even to herself. On a sweltering Thursday afternoon, she was walking home from the hospital when she saw a Western Union bicycle parked in front of the Morrison house, 3 doors down from her own. Mrs. Morrison stood on her front porch, holding a yellow telegram, her face drained of color. Maggie's knees went weak as she realized what the telegram meant. Mrs. Morrison's son, Robert, who had been serving in the Pacific, was missing in action. That night, Maggie sat at her desk and wrote a letter to Tommy, not knowing if he would ever receive it. My dearest Tommy, It has been 21 days since your last letter, and I am struggling to maintain the faith that has sustained me through these months of separation. I tell myself that you are simply busy, that the war has intensified beyond what letters can convey, that your silence means nothing more sinister than operational security. But today, I watched Mrs. Morrison receive the telegram that every military family dreads, and I understood with brutal clarity how fragile our connections really are. The thread that binds us, made of paper and ink and faith, seems suddenly as delicate as spider silk. I'm writing this letter not because I expect a response, but because I need to speak to you across this terrible distance. I need to tell you that regardless of what has happened or what will happen, these months of loving you have been the most real months of my life. You have taught me that love is not just an emotion, but a choice, made new each day despite uncertainty and fear. You have taught me that hope is not passive wishfulness but active faith, the decision to believe in goodness despite evidence to the contrary. If something has happened to you, if these words are reaching only empty air, then let me say now what I would have said in all the letters I will never be able to write. Thank you for showing me what it means to love someone completely. Thank you for giving me a vision of the future worth fighting for. Thank you for making me brave enough to open my heart despite the possibility of its breaking. If you are reading this, if you are safe and simply unable to write, then know that I am here, that I will always be here, that my love for you has become as permanent a part of me as my heartbeat. Either way, know that you are loved beyond measure. Forever yours, Maggie. She sealed the letter and walked through the humid evening to the post office, where she dropped it into the slot with a prayer she could not quite articulate. 2 days later, the letter arrived that changed everything. It was not from Tommy, but from a fellow airman named James Patrick Connolly, whose careful handwriting covered 3 pages of military stationery. Dear Miss Sinclair, you don't know me, but I am writing at the request of my friend Thomas Harper, who has spoken of you so often that I feel I know you myself. Tommy asked me to write this letter because he is currently in a British hospital recovering from injuries sustained during a mission over Germany on July 18th. Let me assure you immediately that his injuries, while serious, are not life-threatening. He suffered a concussion and burns to his hands and forearms when our aircraft was hit by flak over the target. He has been unconscious for most of the past 2 weeks, but the doctors expect a full recovery. I'm writing at his insistence because he was worried that his silence would cause you undue anxiety. Even in his delirium, he spoke your name and worried about the letters he was unable to write. The nurses tell me that he carries your photograph and a pressed flower, and that he asks about them whenever he regains consciousness. Tommy wanted me to tell you that he loves you more deeply than ever, that his brush with mortality has only intensified his determination to come home to you, and that you should not worry about the temporary interruption in his correspondence. He also asked me to tell you something else, something that I hope will not seem presumptuous coming from a stranger. He wants you to know that if anything happens to him, he would want you to live fully, to love again, to not let grief consume the brightness that he treasures in you. He made me promise to tell you this, though I pray it will never be necessary. I expect Tommy will be able to write again within the week. Until then, please know that he is receiving excellent care and that his thoughts are entirely occupied with coming home to you. Respectfully yours, James Patrick Connolly, Staff Sergeant, 351st Bombardment Group. Maggie read the letter 3 times before the words penetrated the fog of relief and residual fear. Tommy was alive, wounded, but alive and recovering. The silence that had tormented her had been not abandonment but unconsciousness, not indifference but injury. She walked to her bedroom and sat on the edge of her bed, holding the letter and feeling the weight of all her unexpressed fears finally lifting from her shoulders. Then she laughed, a sound somewhere between joy and hysteria, and began to cry tears that were equal parts relief and exhaustion. That evening she wrote a letter to James Patrick Connolly, thanking him for his kindness and asking him to convey her love to Tommy. Then she wrote a letter to Tommy himself, pouring out all the fear and hope and determination that had accumulated during the weeks of silence. My darling Tommy, Sergeant Connolly's letter arrived today, and I am writing through tears of relief and gratitude. To know that you are alive and recovering fills me with such joy that I can barely contain it within the boundaries of ordinary language. The past 3 weeks have been the longest of my life, each day stretching endlessly as I waited for news and tried to maintain hope despite the growing silence. I thought I understood the cost of loving someone in wartime, but I had not reckoned with the particular torture of uncertainty, of not knowing whether you were safe or suffering or beyond all earthly concerns. But you are alive, and that knowledge has restored my faith in the future we are building together, letter by letter across this vast distance. Sergeant Connolly mentioned that you were concerned about my reaction to your injuries, and I want you to understand something with perfect clarity. I love you not because you are invulnerable, but because you are human. I love you not because war cannot touch you, but because you face that possibility with courage. Whatever scars you carry when you come home will be proof of your service and sacrifice, and I will love them, as I love everything about you. He also mentioned your concern that if something should happen to you, I should not let grief consume me. I want you to know that while I appreciate the generosity behind that sentiment, it is entirely unnecessary. Nothing is going to happen to you, because I will not permit it. I have decided with all the authority that love grants, that you will come home safely, that we will marry as we planned, that we will grow old together in the house with the garden full of asters. The universe may have other plans, but it will have to contend with my determination first. Heal quickly, my love. Rest and recover and dream of our wedding day. I will be here when you are ready to come home, just as I have been here through every day of your absence. All my love and all my faith, Maggie. Tommy's recovery was slower than either of them had anticipated. His next letter, written in a shaky hand that bore little resemblance to his usual confident scrawl, arrived in mid-August, with apologies for his handwriting and assurances about his improving health. My dearest Maggie, I am writing this propped up in a hospital bed in Surrey, England, where the summer rain patters against the windows and the nurses speak with accents that still sound like music to my American ears. My hands shake as I write, partly from the medication and partly from the excitement of finally being able to correspond with you again. Sergeant Connolly told me about the letter he wrote to you, and I hope it eased your worries without causing new ones. The past month feels like a strange dream, punctuated by moments of clarity when I would surface from unconsciousness, long enough to ask about you, to make sure your photograph was safe, to worry about the letters I wasn't writing. The doctors say I am healing well, though it will be several more weeks before I am fit for duty. The burns on my hands and arms are painful, but not disfiguring, and the headaches from my concussion are gradually subsiding. What troubles me more than the physical injuries is the way the accident has changed my perspective on everything. I have always understood, intellectually, that war involves the possibility of death, but there is a difference between understanding mortality as an abstract concept and feeling the breath of it on your neck. In those moments before I lost consciousness, suspended between sky and earth in a damaged aircraft, I experienced a clarity about what matters that has fundamentally altered how I see the world. What matters is this: the way you laugh when you're surprised, the sound of rain on the roof of your parents' house, the smell of your mother's apple pie cooling on the kitchen windowsill. What matters is the promise we made to each other, not in words but in the accumulation of small moments that add up to a life. What matters is coming home to you and spending whatever time we are granted, building something beautiful together. I'm going to ask you something, Maggie, and I hope you will consider it carefully. When I am discharged from the hospital, I will have a period of leave before returning to active duty. I want to come home to Cedar Falls, and I want to marry you immediately. Not a large wedding with months of planning, but a simple ceremony with just our families and closest friends. I know this is not what we originally planned, and I know it may seem rushed or driven by fear rather than wisdom, but my brush with mortality has taught me that we cannot assume we will have unlimited time to make our dreams reality. I want to be your husband, Maggie, and I want you to be my wife for whatever time we are granted. Think about it, my darling. Write and tell me what your heart says. All my love. Tommy. Maggie received this letter on a Tuesday morning before leaving for work, and she carried it in her pocket throughout her shift, rereading it during breaks and feeling her excitement grow with each reading. By the time she arrived home that evening, her decision was made. My beloved Tommy, yes. Yes to coming home. Yes to marrying immediately. Yes to building our dreams in whatever time we have, rather than waiting for perfect circumstances that may never arrive. Your letter filled me with such joy that I could barely concentrate on my work today. The other nurses teased me about my distraction, but when I told them about your proposal, they all agreed that wartime calls for bold decisions and quick action. I have already spoken with Mother, who was initially concerned about the haste, but ultimately declared that love should not wait for convenient timing. She has begun making inquiries about obtaining your favorite flowers despite the season, and she has promised to contact Reverend Williams about performing the ceremony. Father is pleased with your decision to marry sooner rather than later. He says that uncertainty makes commitment more rather than less meaningful, and that he respects your desire to formalize our union before returning to duty. I want you to know that this decision feels not rushed, but inevitable, as if we have been moving toward this moment since we first fell in love. The war has taught me, as it has taught you, that happiness deferred may be happiness denied, and I refuse to let fear of an uncertain future prevent us from claiming the joy that is rightfully ours. Come home to me, Thomas Harper. Come home and marry me, and let us begin the life we have been dreaming about through all these months of separation. Your future wife, Maggie. Tommy's leave began in early October, nearly a year after he had first left Cedar Falls for training. Maggie waited at the train station in a blue dress that matched her eyes, her auburn hair carefully arranged, her hands trembling with excitement and nervousness. When the train pulled into the station with a great hiss of steam and screech of brakes, her heart began to race. He appeared in the doorway of the passenger car, and for a moment she almost didn't recognize him. The boy who had left Iowa had been replaced by a man whose shoulders carried the weight of experience, and whose eyes held depths that had not been there before. He wore his dress uniform, and she could see the ribbons and decorations that spoke of missions flown and dangers faced. But when he saw her, his face lit with the same smile she had fallen in love with, and she knew that the essential Tommy, her Tommy, had come home intact. They ran toward each other across the platform, and when he lifted her in his arms and spun her around, she felt the pieces of her world clicking back into their proper alignment. They were both crying and laughing, and neither could speak coherently for several minutes. "Let me look at you," he said finally, setting her down but keeping his hands on her waist. "You're even more beautiful than I remembered, and I thought my memory was perfect." She reached up to touch the scar that ran along his left temple, a thin white line that spoke of how close she had come to losing him. "You're different," she said softly. "Older, but still mine." "Always yours," he said, and kissed her with a passion that made the other people on the platform fade into irrelevance. They spent the next 3 days in a whirlwind of preparation. The wedding would be small, family and a handful of close friends, but Maggie's mother threw herself into the planning with determined joy. The church was decorated with autumn flowers, Maggie's dress was her grandmother's wedding gown, altered to fit her smaller frame, and the photographer was the man who had taken her high school graduation pictures. On the morning of the wedding, October 15th, 1943, Maggie woke before dawn and lay in bed thinking about the journey that had brought her to this day. 2 years ago, she had been a small-town girl with vague dreams of nursing school and marriage to her childhood sweetheart. The war had transformed those simple dreams into something deeper and more purposeful, had tested their love in ways she could never have imagined, and had taught her that happiness was not a destination, but a choice made daily in the face of uncertainty. Tommy spent the night before the wedding at his parents' house, and according to tradition, they did not see each other until she walked down the aisle of St. Mary's Catholic Church at 2 o'clock that afternoon. The ceremony was simple but profound. Reverend Williams spoke about the sacred nature of marriage, about the way love could create meaning in the midst of chaos, about the importance of promises made before God and community. When it came time for vows, Tommy and Maggie had chosen to write their own. Tommy spoke first, his voice clear and strong despite the emotion that threatened to overwhelm him. "Margaret Rose Sinclair, I take you as my wife with full knowledge of what that means in these uncertain times. I promise to love you not just in safety, but in danger, not just in peace, but in war, not just when we are together, but when duty separates us. I promise to carry your love with me wherever I go, to let it guide my decisions and strengthen my resolve, to let it remind me always of what I am fighting to protect and preserve. I promise to come home to you, and if I cannot, I promise that my last conscious thought will be of your love and the blessed time we have shared together." Maggie's vows, delivered through tears of joy and determination, were equally powerful. Thomas Edmund Harper, I take you as my husband, knowing that loving a soldier means living with uncertainty and fear, but also knowing that our love is strong enough to bridge any distance and endure any separation. I promise to support you in your service, to keep our dreams alive during the times we are apart, to trust in your return, and to build a life worthy of the sacrifices you are making. I promise to love you not just as the boy who grew up 4 houses away, but as the man who chose to serve something larger than himself. And I promise to grow into a woman worthy of the love you have given me. When they exchanged rings, simple gold bands that would have to last a lifetime, the small congregation erupted in applause and tears. They kissed as husband and wife for the first time, while organ music filled the church and afternoon sunlight streamed through the stained glass windows, painting them both in colors of amber and rose. The reception was held in the church hall, with dancing to music provided by Tommy's childhood friend on the piano and Maggie's cousin on the violin. They served cake made with rationed sugar and coffee brewed stronger than anyone had tasted in months, and everyone agreed it was the most beautiful wedding they had ever attended. But the most meaningful moment came late in the evening, when Tommy and Maggie slipped away from the celebration and walked hand in hand to the park where they had played as children. They sat on the swing set where he had first kissed her 3 years earlier, now as husband and wife, and talked about their future. "I have to report back to England in 10 days, Tommy said, his thumb tracing circles on the back of her hand. "This leave is going to pass too quickly." "Then we'll make every moment count," Maggie replied. "We'll sleep late and take long walks and talk until dawn. We'll be completely present for each other." "I want to tell you something," Tommy said. "Something I've been thinking about during my recovery. When I was unconscious in the hospital, I had the strangest dreams. I dreamed about the life we're going to have after the war, the house we'll buy, the children we'll raise, the way we'll grow old together. And those dreams were so vivid, so detailed, that when I woke up, I felt like I had lived them." "Tell me about them," Maggie said. "We have a house on the edge of town with a big front porch and a vegetable garden in the back. You're still nursing, but part-time, and I'm teaching mathematics at the high school. We have 3 children, 2 boys who look like me and a girl who looks exactly like you. On Sunday afternoons, we sit on that front porch and watch our neighbors walk by, and we hold hands and talk about ordinary things, and we're completely happy." Maggie smiled and leaned her head against his shoulder. "That sounds perfect, and I believe every word of it." "Do you really?" "Yes," she said firmly, "because love this strong doesn't just disappear. It creates its own future." Tommy returned to England on October 25, 1943, carrying with him a new photograph, their wedding picture, to accompany the one he had carried through his first year of service. Maggie returned to her work at the hospital, but now she wore a wedding ring and carried the title of Mrs. Thomas Harper, and somehow those simple changes made her feel more grounded, more purposeful, more connected to the larger story of which they were both part. Their letters resumed, but with a different quality now. They were writing not as sweethearts separated by circumstance, but as husband and wife temporarily parted by duty. The difference was subtle but profound. Their love had been sanctified by public vows and community witness, and that sanctification gave their correspondence new weight and meaning. Tommy continued flying missions over Europe through the winter of 1943 and the spring of 1944, participating in the intensive bombing campaigns that preceded D-Day. His letters spoke less of fear and loneliness, and more of purpose and determination. He had something concrete to protect now, something legally and spiritually his own. Maggie, meanwhile, threw herself into her work with renewed energy. She joined the Red Cross, organized bond drives, and opened her home to other military wives who needed support and companionship. She discovered that being married to a soldier gave her a kind of authority among other women whose loved ones were overseas, and she used that authority to build networks of mutual support and encouragement. The war in Europe ended in May 1945, and Tommy was among the first wave of servicemen to return home. He arrived in Cedar Falls on a warm June morning, carrying a duffel bag filled with souvenirs and a heart full of dreams deferred but not diminished. Maggie met him at the train station wearing the same blue dress she had worn for their wedding, and when he stepped off the train, she saw that the boy who had left and the man who had returned were finally, completely, the same person. The war had not broken him or changed him beyond recognition. It had simply deepened him, given him gravitas and perspective, and an unshakable appreciation for the ordinary miracles of civilian life. They spent their first evening together as a peacetime couple sitting on their front porch. Not the porch from Tommy's dreams, but the porch of the small house they had rented on the other side of town. They held hands and talked about ordinary things: the weather, the neighbors, Maggie's work at the hospital, Tommy's plans to use the GI Bill to finish his college degree. "Do you remember the dreams I told you about?" Tommy asked as the sun set behind the maple trees. "The house and the children and the Sunday afternoons?" "Of course," Maggie said. "I still have them," he said. "Every detail is still clear in my mind, and now that I'm home, I think we should start making them real." Maggie squeezed his hand and smiled. "We already have," she said. "The moment you stepped off that train, we started living the life we dreamed about through all those letters." Tommy reached into his shirt pocket and pulled out a worn piece of paper. Not a letter, but something else entirely. It was the pressed aster she had sent him in her first letter, now brittle with age, but still recognizable, still carrying the faintest scent of autumn and home. "I carried this through every mission," he said. "It was in my pocket when we were hit over Germany, and it was the first thing I asked for when I woke up in the hospital. The nurses thought I was delirious asking for a dead flower, but Sergeant Connolly understood. He knew that some things are worth preserving, even when they seem fragile." Maggie took the flower gently, holding it up to the fading light. "It's still beautiful," she said. "So are we," Tommy replied. "After everything we've been through, we're still beautiful." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching their neighbors return from work, listening to the sounds of a world at peace. Children played in nearby yards, their laughter carrying on the evening breeze. Somewhere in the distance, a radio played dance music from an open window. The smell of someone's dinner cooking drifted across the street, mixing with the scent of honeysuckle and fresh-cut grass. "I want to write one more letter," Maggie said suddenly. "To whom?" Tommy asked. "To us," she said. "To the people we were when this all started. I want to tell them that they made the right choices, that their love was worth fighting for, that their dreams were worth preserving." Tommy smiled and kissed her temple, tasting the salt of tears he hadn't realized she was crying. "What would you tell them?" Maggie thought for a moment, then spoke as if she were indeed writing to their younger selves across the gulf of time and experience. "I would tell them that love is not diminished by distance or tested by hardship, but refined by it. I would tell them that the letters they wrote to each other would become more precious than any treasure, because they contained not just words, but the essence of who they were becoming. I would tell them that the waiting was not time lost, but time invested, and that every day of separation made their reunion more meaningful. I would tell them," Tommy added, "that courage is not the absence of fear, but the decision to act despite fear. I would tell them that the photograph and the pressed flower were not just souvenirs but talismans, physical reminders that love creates its own geography, its own time zone, its own reality. Most of all," Maggie continued, "I would tell them that their story was not ending, but beginning, that the war was not the climax of their love story, but the prologue, and that the real adventure would start when they learned to love each other not in crisis, but in peace, not across distance, but in daily proximity, not in the intensity of separation, but in the gentle rhythms of ordinary life." As if summoned by her words, a shooting star streaked across the darkening sky, and they both made the same wish without speaking it aloud. For time, lots of it, to explore all the dimensions of the love they had discovered and preserved through the most difficult years of their young lives. Years later, when they did indeed live in the house with the front porch and raise the children who looked like both of them, when Tommy taught mathematics and Maggie continued her nursing career, when Sunday afternoons found them holding hands and watching neighbors pass by, they would remember this evening as the moment when their real life began. They would frame their wedding photograph and display it prominently in their living room. But they would keep the letters they wrote to each other during the war in a special box in their bedroom, reading them occasionally to remember not just who they had been, but how they had become who they were. And sometimes on quiet evenings when the children were asleep and the house was still, Maggie would take out that pressed aster, carefully preserved between the pages of their family Bible, and hold it up to the light, marveling that something so fragile had endured so much and still retained its essential beauty. "Like us," Tommy would say, understanding her thoughts without words, as married couples learn to do. "Like us," she would agree, and they would sit together in the lamplight, grateful beyond measure for the ordinary miracle of growing old together, of having been granted not just survival, but happiness, not just reunion, but a lifetime to explore all the depths of the love that had sustained them through the darkest hours of the 20th century. Their love story, which began with a letter on a Tuesday morning in October 1941, continued to unfold through decades of shared mornings and quiet evenings, of raised children and weathered storms, of anniversary celebrations and everyday kindnesses. It became the kind of love that inspires other couples, the kind that makes people believe in the possibility of lasting happiness, the kind that proves that some promises, made in youth and tested by extraordinary circumstances, can indeed last forever. And if you had asked either of them, in their twilight years, what they had learned about love during those crucial months when death seemed closer than morning, they would have told you that love is not just an emotion, but a decision, not just a feeling, but a practice, not just a sentiment, but a commitment to creating beauty and meaning in the face of uncertainty and loss. They would have told you that the letters they wrote to each other were not just correspondence, but acts of faith, each one a small victory over despair, each one a bridge across the abyss that war had opened between them. And they would have told you that their story was not unusual but universal, that in every generation, young people fall in love and face impossible odds and discover that the human capacity for hope and dedication and creative love is stronger than any force that seeks to destroy it. Tommy Harper and Maggie Sinclair. Harper lived long, full lives together, and when they died within months of each other, as long-time married couples often do, their children found among their possessions a shoebox full of letters, a pressed flower, and a wedding photograph that still radiated joy after more than 50 years. But more than these tangible reminders, they left a legacy of love that had been tested by history and had emerged not just intact, but strengthened, not just preserved, but deepened. They left proof that even in the darkest times, when the future seems most uncertain, it is possible to choose love, to nurture hope, and to build something beautiful that will outlast the circumstances that threaten to destroy it. Their love story became family legend, passed down through children and grandchildren who grew up believing that true love was not just possible, but probable, not just romantic fantasy, but achievable reality. And in that way, the letters they wrote to each other during those crucial months of separation continued to create love and hope and possibility long after the war that had tested them became history, long after they themselves had become memory, long after their individual voices had merged into the eternal conversation that connects all lovers across time and space and circumstance. The pressed aster, carefully preserved in the family Bible, remained as beautiful and mysterious as love itself, fragile but enduring, ordinary but miraculous, a small thing that had somehow contained within itself the power to sustain two hearts across an ocean of uncertainty and fear, and to remind them always of the truth that had carried them through their darkest hours and their brightest days, that love, once truly given and received, becomes as permanent as starlight and as renewable as spring, as intimate as breath and as vast as the sky under which they had pledged their faith to each other on that golden October afternoon when the whole world seemed to hold its breath in anticipation of their happiness.